to make it go down to 0. Therefore, we're going to do the opposite thing to it, which in this case would be a credit. So I'm going to put that on the next one. Yes, we could do this all at one time, but there's not that many, so we'll just do a couple more. So 2300, that's what's in there. That's what needs to be taken out of there. And next one, office supplies expense, and that expense needs to go down. It has a debit balance in it, like all expenses do. And we're going to do the opposite thing to it in order to make it go down, which in this case is a credit. So I'm going to copy that, put that in C15, right click, paste, 123, another negative, 750. And finally, we have utilities and phone. Probably should say expense after that, but later on we won't even have the word expense on a lot of the expense accounts. It'll just be in the expense section, which of course is down here at the bottom. And it has a debit balance, and we need to make it go down, so we're going to do the opposite thing to it, which in this case would be a credit. So I'm going to copy that. We're going to put that in C16, right click, paste it, 123, credit being for negative 972. Okay, so now we have all these credits. If I highlight them, they add up to 56,612. So we can see that in the taskbar will add it up for us. That, of course, is what the debit will need to be in order for our debits to equal the credits. So it's an uneven looking account in that there's a lot more credit number of accounts than debits, but of course numerically the debits will equal the credits. Now I'm going to put the number in there by doing our plug function. So instead of hitting equals, I'm going to select negative SUM. And now you could move this out of the way if you want, like this, or you could just start down here. If you start down here instead of starting up at the top and highlight those, and I always tend to highlight both sides because in later transactions, or if I adjust the transaction, maybe this should have been a debit or something. And if I just highlight both sides, it'll include them both. What will that do? Well, it added them up and then it flipped the sign, meaning if I highlight both sides of it now, we are now in balance, meaning the debits equal the credits, because debits minus credits equals 0. Okay, so let's post that out and see if it does what we want it to do. What do we want it to do? We want all these to go down to 0. That's the goal. And once that happens, once we post this out, that will end up to be net income, which will be that number. That's what I think is going to happen. And in order to do that, I never told you what that account was going to be. That's going to be income summary. So we're closing all the expenses out to income summary. So let's post that there. I'm going to copy that, post that in C8, right click, paste, 123. Okay, so now we can do these. And so we can do the income summary on top here, so we can see the income summary account, and there's something in there, of course, which we can see on the formula bar up here. E6 is in there, which is this number here. So we're going to double click on it and then go to the end of it and say plus, and then point to the second account that should be in the income summary, which is D8. So then enter, and we can see what happened. And these two accounts are now in there. I'm going to hit enter, and now what's the amount? It adds up to net income down here, same amount. Now we're going to record all the expense accounts through this section. So the first one was sales and returns, which is kind of a contra revenue account, but still it acts like an expense. We're going to keep it there. It's okay. We're going to say equals and point to that 500. What's going to happen? This will go down to 0. Next one, we are on sales discount, and we're already there. We don't have to move it or anything. We're just going to say this equals and point to this 600 should bring this down to 0. Now we're on cost of goods sold. We're already in the cell we need to be in. Therefore, we can just say equals, point to that 37,442 credit, which will bring this debit balance down to 0. Now we're in salaries expense, and we're just going to say equals. We're going to post our journal entry up here in salaries expense, taking this balance down to 0. Now we are in depreciation. I'm just going to say equals. We're going to point to that 450, which will take this 450 down to 0. Now we're in insurance expense. We're almost there. And we're going to say this equals, and we're going to point to the 2,300, which will take this down to 0. Now we're in office supplies expense, and once again, equals, pointing to the 750, bringing this to 0. Now we are in the last one, utilities and phone expense, and we're going to point to the 972, bringing this down to 0. Now you might be thinking, isn't there a faster way to do that? And there is. If I delete these, I'm just doing them real fast one more time. You don't have to delete these, obviously. I'm going to delete them. And then if I want the formula to come down in proportion, so we could use our autofill or copy and paste in there. So if you put our cursor on the fill handle till it looks like that, and just drag down auto drive and fill calculates to this. And so notice what happens, it moves the formula down. So we want to get used to that idea of Excel. That's one of the most critical ideas to get down with Excel. We also see that we have zeros on this side now. That's what we wanted. Everything is zero over there. Now, the only things that aren't zero that are below the capital or the owner's equity account are these two. So we need to make these two zero. So the third step in the 4-step process of the closing will say that we're going to close as of the cutoff end date into the month again. That is to close the income summary account. So we closed out the income statement to this new account, this clearing account, but we really want it to go to the capital account. So now that we've verified that this did what we want, it's the same as the net income, and these are all zero. Now let's close that out to capital. So I want to make this go to zero now, even though we just put the two numbers in there. Now we want it to go to zero. It has a credit in it. In order to make it go down, we do the opposite, which in this case would be a debit. So we're going to copy that. I'm going to copy this. We're going to put that in C18, right click and paste 123. The amount will be 44386. By the way, if you try to use some formulas and you see some, like for example, if I tried to do this, and don't do this, I'm just going to show you a common mistake that'll happen if we say equals and I point to either of these two numbers, then I could end up with a circle reference. Let me show you. If I point to that number and then later we're going to post to this number. So if I double click on this and then say plus and then click on that number because I want to post it there, then it'll do something like that, which means what it's saying is you're asking me to calculate this number with a number that you got from this number. That's called a circle reference, and that kind of thing happens all the time. It's a logical problem with the computer can't calculate the number you're trying to calculate with the number we're trying to calculate. Now the circle reference could be a lot longer than that, meaning there could be a lot different formulas in the calculation, but if that happens, then try just hard coding. So we're going to say over here we just have to put in the 4386, and then we're going to have a credit of negative 4386. Hard coding meaning we're not going to have a formula, we're just going to type the number in there. All right, and then the credit then is going to go into the owner's capital account. So now we're moving it from the income summary to the capital account. Note the capital account has a credit in it. If we credit it again, it's going to make capital go up because we're going to do the same thing to it, which makes sense because the capital represents what is owed to the owner, or you can also think of it as the book value of the company, which of course went up by the income that was made by the company in the month of April in this case. So I'm going to right click and paste 123. Now we can post that out. So we're going to go over here to the income summary. The income summary should have this 4386 in it until we post this new one out. Then if we click on it, you can see there's two things in it. So we can see that in the formula bar up here. We can also see it if we double click on it down here. So I'm going to go to the end of it. We're going to say plus and then point to the income summary there. So now we have three items in there, the income summary here, income summary, and income summary. And if we hit enter, then now it goes back to zero. Now, even though it's zero, it's good to post this way because we can see what is in there. It's zero because it's really adding up those three numbers, however. Then the difference is going to go to this cell in I-15 to post to the capital account. So we're going to say equals, and we're going to go to this 4386, which will be in the credit balance, bring the credit balance up in the credit direction. And there we have that. We're back in balance down here. All right, so now we have all zeros. That's our goal, except for this one last thing called draws. That's the money that the owner has drawn out. That's going to be the last step of our 4-step process, which we will post as of 4:30, as we do with all closing entries. So if we look at the draws, we can see that it has a debit balance represented by the fact that it does not have brackets. We need to make it go down. We're going to do the opposite thing to it in this case, which would be a credit. So I'm going to copy the draws. Here's the date. I'm going to be on the bottom of the date. Right click and paste 123. And then we're going to go into the credit column. I'm going to put a negative 10,000. Missing a zero, 10,000. And then we're going to have a debit of the same amount, of course, 10,000. And the debit will go to draws. What will a debit do to draws? will draw, the debit will go to the owner capital. And what will the debit do to owner capital? Well, owner's capital has a credit balance in it. If we debit it, we're doing the opposite thing to it, which will make it go down. And that makes sense because draws represents the money that was taken out by the owner, and therefore it has less owed to the owner, or the book value of the company has gone down. And it doesn't have to be money, by the way. The owner could have drawn out some other asset, but I'm going to copy that, and we're going to put that on top in C21, right click and paste 1, 2, 3. All right, now we can post this out. So we're going to post it here. So I'm in I-15, something's in it. I can see what is in it in the formula bar. I'm just going to double click on it, go to the end of it. So we have E19, and we're going to add to E19 the amount that is in this case, D21. That will bring, once we hit enter, the owner's equity down by that 10,000. And of course, we're out of bounds by the 10,000. Now we're going to do this last one, and hopefully this draws goes to 0. And if it does, then we are done. So we are in I-16, I'm going to say equals. We're going to point to this credit. That's going to bring that debit balance down to 0 and put it back in balance down here like so. All right, so that's it. So now we have our zeros here, and we can count up from the beginning of May 1st and track our time as we go in that way.